Darth Vader stood tall, a dark and imposing figure on the gleaming deck of the Death Star, the mechanical hiss of his respirator echoing through the sterile, metallic corridor. His duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi had been brief yet profoundly significant, a culmination of decades of conflict, betrayal, and inner turmoil. The clash of their lightsabers, the sizzle of energy with each strike, had been more than a battle of skill. It had been a battle of wills, ideologies, and unresolved emotions. Vader, once the proud and gifted Anakin Skywalker, had not always feared Obi-Wan Kenobi. On the contrary, he had admired him, even loved him as a brother. Yet that bond had soured on Mustafar, where their last battle as Jedi and Sith had scarred both their bodies and souls. Obi-Wan had left Anakin to burn, broken and defeated, but Vader had risen, encased in black armor, more machine than man, and fueled by the hatred that had replaced his hope. When Vader encountered Obi-Wan on the Death Star, the fear that gripped him was not one born of cowardice but of something deeper, something rooted in the fractured history between the two. It was the fear of unfinished business, the dread that Obi-Wan's presence represented a link to a past Vader had tried so hard to bury. In that moment, the former Jedi Knight confronted the man who had once been his mentor, his friend, and, ultimately, his judge. As their lightsabers crossed, Vader's mind raced, though his body moved with calculated precision. He had spent years suppressing every vestige of Anakin Skywalker, rejecting the man who had been consumed by dreams of saving Padme and bringing peace to the galaxy. Yet Obi-Wan's gaze seemed to pierce through the helmet, through the layers of armor and hate, to the broken man within. Vader feared that Obi-Wan saw the truth, that beneath the dark visage of the Sith Lord lay Anakin Skywalker, tormented and incomplete. And so, fear coursed through Vader as he fought. Not fear of death or defeat. He was too powerful, too disciplined to succumb to such thoughts. His fear was existential, a fear that Obi-Wan's reappearance would unravel the fragile identity he had forged as Darth Vader. It was the terror of exposure, of being confronted with the consequences of his choices, the lives he had destroyed, and the ideals he had betrayed. Obi-Wan, for his part, fought with a calm resolve. He was no longer the vibrant warrior of the Clone Wars, but an old man with a deeper understanding of the Force and his place within it. He knew his role in the galaxy's story was nearing its end, but his mission was far from over. Obi-Wan had come to protect Luke Skywalker, to ensure the survival of the boy who represented the galaxy's last hope. Vader, unaware of Luke's true identity, saw Obi-Wan as a remnant of a dying age, an obstacle to be crushed. The fight was not about physical dominance. It was about closure. Obi-Wan's movements were deliberate, almost serene, as if he knew something Vader did not. He parried Vader's strikes with the ease of someone who had nothing left to prove. For every heavy blow Vader delivered, Obi-Wan countered with a finesse that reminded Vader of the man who had once trained him. In the end, when Obi-Wan lowered his weapon and allowed Vader's blade to strike him down, it was not an act of defeat but of transcendence. Obi-Wan had embraced the Force fully, becoming one with it, and his disappearance left Vader momentarily stunned. The Sith Lord stood there, staring at the empty robe crumpled on the floor, his victory feeling hollow. It was in that moment, surrounded by stormtroopers and the hum of the Death Star, that Vader's fear crystallized. Obi-Wan had achieved something Vader could not comprehend, something that challenged his understanding of power and the Force. The act of surrender, the willingness to let go, was antithetical to everything Vader had built his life upon. For him, power was control, domination, and the imposition of his will upon the galaxy. Obi-Wan's death defied all of that. As he turned and walked away, the weight of the encounter lingered. Vader was left to wrestle with the echoes of the past and the nagging sense that Obi-Wan had not truly been defeated. His former master had hinted at something greater, a promise that struck at the core of Vader's being. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. It was a warning that haunted Vader in the days that followed, as he oversaw the Empire's operations and hunted the Rebel Alliance. Deep within the confines of the Death Star, Vader reflected on Obi-Wan's cryptic words. What did they mean? Could Obi-Wan's power extend beyond death? The Sith were taught to fear death, to see it as the end of their influence, yet Obi-Wan had faced it with peace and purpose. This idea gnawed at Vader, planting seeds of doubt about the path he had chosen. If Obi-Wan could transcend death, what did that say about the power of the light side, about the teachings Vader had rejected? In his private chambers, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the cold void of space, Vader stared out at the stars. His fear was not merely for himself but for what Obi-Wan represented. His death on the Death Star was not an ending but a beginning, a catalyst for something Vader could not fully grasp. Obi-Wan's sacrifice had set events in motion that would ripple through the galaxy, through the Force, and ultimately through Vader himself. For all his power, Vader was still bound by the chains of his past. The shadow of Obi-Wan loomed large, a reminder of the man he had once been and the man he could never be again. As much as he tried to bury Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan's presence, and his final act, had unearthed those buried parts of himself, forcing him to confront the truth he feared most, that his destiny was not as clear-cut as he wanted to believe. Vader's fear of Obi-Wan was complex, layered, and deeply personal. It was the fear of a man who had lost his way, who had chosen darkness and was now confronted by the light he had turned away from. Obi-Wan's death was not a victory for Vader but a challenge, a puzzle he would spend years trying to solve. It was the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead him back to himself, to the redemption that seemed impossible in that moment but was destined to come. As Vader departed the lifeless robe Obi-Wan had left behind, his thoughts churned with confusion and unease. The sight of his fallen master evaporating into nothingness unsettled him deeply. This was no ordinary death, and it defied everything Vader thought he understood about the Force. Sith teachings had drilled into him that power was tied to the physical realm, that death was final unless manipulated through the dark arts of immortality. Yet Obi-Wan had slipped into the unknown with an unshakable calm, leaving Vader to grapple with the weight of his cryptic promise. In the hours following the duel, as the Death Star's operations continued with clinical precision, Vader found himself pacing in solitude, consumed by questions he dared not voice aloud. The idea that Obi-Wan could retain some form of consciousness or influence beyond death unsettled him. He had witnessed the most powerful Jedi Masters fall before him, each one vanquished as a testament to his ascendance as Darth Vader. But Obi-Wan's death did not feel like a triumph. It felt like an omission, a vital piece of the puzzle he couldn't yet grasp. Obi-Wan's calm acceptance of his fate had cast a glaring light on Vader's own path. The dark side had promised power, yet it demanded fear, anger, and pain as fuel. Vader had embraced this cycle, believing it to be the price of greatness, but Obi-Wan's serene passing posed a dangerous question. Was power truly strength if it came at the cost of peace? The Sith philosophy thrived on the denial of this very idea, but Obi-Wan's actions defied it so profoundly that Vader could not ignore the implications. Moreover, Obi-Wan's deliberate sacrifice seemed more strategic than symbolic. Vader's instincts told him that his former master had been protecting something or someone on the Death Star. His arrival there had not been random, nor had his willingness to die. Vader began to replay their duel in his mind, searching for clues. Obi-Wan had not fought to win. Instead, he had fought to delay. The realization sparked a flicker of unease in Vader. What could Obi-Wan have been protecting so fervently that he would sacrifice his life for it? The possibility of Luke crossed his mind, but Vader dismissed it, at least consciously. He had no reason to suspect the boy he'd encountered on the Death Star trench was anything more than a talented rebel pilot. Yet a deeper, unspoken part of him clung to the name Skywalker, unable to fully suppress the implications. In his desperation to sever all ties to his former self, Vader had failed to recognize that his identity could still echo across the galaxy in ways he hadn't foreseen. But beneath the tactical questions, beneath the doubts about Obi-Wan's motives, lay Vader's most primal fear, the fear of being wrong. For years, he had poured his soul into the dark side, becoming a Sith as a means of justifying the atrocities he had committed. It was easier to see himself as Darth Vader, the chosen enforcer of the Emperor, than to reconcile the guilt and loss that had consumed Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan's death, however, brought the cracks in his facade into sharper focus. What if the path he had chosen was flawed? What if the light side, the Jedi Code, still held truths that he could not extinguish? Vader could not bear to confront these questions directly. Instead, he suppressed them, redirecting his fear and confusion into anger and duty. The Emperor's voice was a constant reminder in the back of his mind, urging him to remain focused, to crush the rebellion, to complete his destiny. Yet even as he carried out the Emperor's commands with ruthless efficiency, Vader couldn't fully escape the ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Every decision he made, every lightsaber he ignited, was haunted by the knowledge that Obi-Wan's death had not silenced his influence. It had amplified it. As weeks turned to months, Vader became increasingly preoccupied with unraveling the mystery of Obi-Wan's disappearance. The Sith Lord, who had once prided himself on controlling his emotions, found himself slipping into bouts of obsession. He meditated on the Force, seeking answers, but the dark side offered him none. It thrived on absolutes, on certainty, but Obi-Wan's death defied such simplicity. The light side seemed to shimmer just beyond Vader's reach, mocking his inability to comprehend its depths. Vader's fear grew more insidious, feeding on his pride and doubt. It whispered that Obi-Wan's sacrifice was not the end but the beginning of a larger plan. The idea of a new Jedi rising from the ashes of the old order filled Vader with dread. He had dedicated his life to exterminating the Jedi, believing their extinction to be the ultimate proof of his loyalty and power. Yet Obi-Wan's cryptic words suggested otherwise, as if the Force itself had plans that no Sith, not even the Emperor, could fully predict or control. And so Vader's fear was twofold. He feared what Obi-Wan might have set in motion, an unseen chain of events that could challenge the Empire's dominion and his own place within it. But he also feared the reflection Obi-Wan held up to him, the inescapable truth that Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker were not separate entities but two halves of the same soul. As much as he wanted to deny it, the death of Obi-Wan had stirred memories of the young, hopeful Jedi he had once been, a man who had fought for justice and love rather than power and vengeance. The Death Star became a symbol of Vader's inner conflict. Its destructive power mirrored his own, a monument to the dark side's promise of dominance. Yet even as the station stood as a testament to the Empire's might, it also stood as a reminder of its fragility. The rebellion persisted, and now, with Obi-Wan's mysterious departure, it carried an undercurrent of defiance that seemed to resonate with the Force itself. Each time Vader closed his eyes to meditate, he felt it. A faint echo of Obi-Wan's presence, not as a tormentor but as a quiet, unrelenting force. It was not anger or hatred that lingered but something deeper, something that Vader could not name yet could not ignore. The light side had not died with Obi-Wan. It had grown stronger, weaving itself into the galaxy in ways that defied Vader's comprehension. In the end, Vader's fear was rooted in the unknown. For all his mastery of the Force, for all his triumphs as a Sith Lord, he could not predict what Obi-Wan's death truly meant. It was a loose thread in the tapestry of his life, one he could not pull without unraveling everything he believed. And so he pressed on, burying his fear beneath layers of anger and duty, even as it gnawed at the edges of his soul.